Welcome to the Korea Deconstructed podcast. This is David Tizzard. Well, South Korea has had a week. It's had a few crazy days. I've just finished speaking on Iranian television. Before that, I did Chinese, Singapore, and Korean. They've all been asking, what's been going on? What did the president do? Why did it happen? What were the consequences and what happens next? Of course, the situation is flexible. Everything is still kind of up in the air, and we're waiting for a big autopsy on what has just transpired. One thing that I have become aware of in the last 24 hours as I've been thinking about this, and I'll try to give you the conclusion right here at the start in case the rest doesn't interest you, is this. Just because President Yoon is wrong, it doesn't mean necessarily that Lee Jae-myung has to be the answer. That is something that I can't quite get out of my head. For those of you that don't know, Lee Jae-myung is the head of the Democratic Party, the opposition party here in South Korea. And if an impeachment does go through, if President Yoon steps down, or if there is a presidential election, which at the moment we can't say for certain, but the overwhelming public sentiment is against the president, and I expect that people are going to line the streets in a way similar to what we saw 8 years ago with the impeachment of then Conservative leader President Park Geun-hye. At that time, people sat with their candles through the winter in huge numbers until the president's position became untenable. That's likely to happen here if President Yoon doesn't face impeachment or doesn't step down. We're likely to see the country enter a stage of gridlock, and this causes a lot of, you can't get through downtown Seoul. For those of you that might have a passing knowledge of the country, this is in Gwanghwamun, where Gyeongbok Palace is. People will go there, wear the hanboks. In front of that is the statue of Admiral Lee Sun-shin, King Sejong the Wang. They stand there. Behind the palaces, Bukhansan, and then down towards the south you have the Cheonggyecheon stream. It's very much a big part of downtown Seoul, and that's likely to go into shutdown if the president remains in power. If he doesn't, and there is a presidential election, the Democratic Party will probably be the favorites for this, and that means Lee Jae-myung will become the front runner to become the next president. Now, Lee Jae-myung, he lost to President Yoon in the last democratic election. So the country has already decided once that that's not the guy to take the country forward. One of the reasons President Yoon won that, coming from nowhere politically, is because, certainly I would believe this to be true, and other analysts have suggested it, is that President Yoon, he when he was elected, it wasn't with a huge populist support base. Sometimes people liken him to Donald Trump in the United States or Boris Johnson in the United Kingdom, and I find those comparisons a little bit ethnocentric and not very accurate. They're different figures and they have different support bases. People will support Trump or Johnson irrespective of what they say or do. And Yoon Suk-yeol, he didn't have that support base. It simply wasn't there. What happened is the Democratic Party, who came to power on the back of similar protests after Park Geun-hye was ousted, Moon Jae-in, who had also previously lost the presidential election to Park Geun-hye, after those protests, Moon Jae-in came in, and this was the Democratic Party were meant to rule for the next 10, 20 years. It was their time. The Conservative Party was dead in South Korea, and you can find articles attesting to this, that they had no political leaders, they had no hope, nobody resonated with their ideas really, and it felt like the country belonged to the Democratic Party. President Moon Jae-in had a very strong support base. Of course, there were those opposed to him, but his figures, approval ratings were reasonable, and he brought a sense of hope and optimism to the country. This was also seen with the arrival of the Pyeongchang 2018 Winter Olympics, which was another shot in the arm for the country's enthusiasm and feel-good factor. But then the Democratic Party almost imploded, and it was the it did it to itself in a way, because a series of incidents brought down its leading figures. The Moon Jae-in's number 2 was sent to jail for sexual assault. The Justice Minister, Cho Guk, his family was investigated, and family members were found guilty of various crimes. Park Won-sun, the mayor of Seoul, charges came out of sexual harassment, sexual assault, and he walked into a park and took his own life. And this was the party that was meant to bring justice. This was the party that was meant to be for the people. And when so many of its leading figures were found to be guilty, the term that was often brandied about in the South Korean media, it became sort of a catchphrase, was neronambul, which is, when I do it, it's romance, and when you do it, it's adultery. It talks of hypocrisy. It talks of double standards, and the Democratic Party was sort of seemingly found guilty of that. And so when it came to the presidential election, many people looked at Lee Jae-myung, who was, who the Democratic Party put forward, and they sort of, some people held their nose and voted for him to try to keep Yoon out. We saw the Justice Party, which normally gets a reasonable base of a couple of 1 million people. They got very few. They dropped down to 800,000 votes in the last election because, like I said, many people held their nose and voted for Lee Jae-myung, but it still wasn't enough. People decided that the Democratic Party had to almost sort of be punished for failing to keep their party in check, for fail to put the nation forward. This was not against ex-President Moon Jae-in himself, but perhaps the party. And so we saw the Conservative Party come back. One thing I probably should say here is a little disclaimer that when you hear the Conservative Party and Democratic Party, you might think, oh, that's like the Republicans and the Democrats, or that's like the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. This is just, but that's not true. As a European, I find both the two main parties here in South Korea conservative. They are both conservative to my mind. Of course, they're slightly different, and the Democratic Party will favour more labour issues, and they will speak to the voice of the people, and the Conservative Party will speak more to big business, finance and free market. That is a clear and an obvious distinction. However, sometimes for me, one of the biggest differences between the Conservative Party and the Democratic Party in South Korea is their view on international relations, is their view on North Korea and Japan. The Conservative Party in general has always taken a very welcoming approach to Tokyo and Washington, and a very hardline stance against Beijing and Pyongyang. While, on the other hand, the Democratic Party, they're generally very anti-Japan. They take a very antagonistic position towards Japan. Japan colonized South Korea for 35 years, from 1910 to 1945, and that memory, that history is dragged up through media. The Democratic Party like to use it as a tool to gain political support, and this is not to downplay the effects of colonization or the scars inflicted on the South Korean people, but the Democratic Party, it's almost as if they like to use that as a political tool. And as well as anti-Japanese sentiment, they also favor engagement with North Korea. Every Democratic Party leader that has been elected, that's Kim Dae-jung, Roh Moo-hyun, and Moon Jae-in, they've all gone to Pyongyang to meet with the leadership there. They've all met with Kim Dae-jung in 2000, met with Kim Jong-il in Pyongyang. Roh Moo-hyun met with Kim Jong-il in 2007 in Pyongyang. And then Moon Jae-in met with Kim Jong-un 3 times in Pyongyang and around the border area as well. So the Democratic Party, they take a very open and welcoming approach to North Korea. They see North Korea as somebody to shake hands with, to sit down at the table and to try to work things out. They see them perhaps as brothers and sisters who have been divided by Cold War politics and lines in the sand, families divided by ideology. And of course, there's a lot of truth to that. But what do you do with North Korea when, their torpedoes, they shell the RAS Cheonan and take 30 to 40 South Korean lives, when they bomb islands, when they blow up buildings in the Kaesong area, when they send balloons full of trash, excrement and junk into your country. What do you do at these times? The South Korean Conservative Party have generally been hostile and said North Korea is a country without freedom. North Korea is a country that denies its citizens basic human rights of freedom of thought and freedom of expression, and that should be focused on. Whereas in Japan, this is a democratic country where the people enjoy capitalism and consumer goods, and they can voice their opinions on a large number of issues. You know, if you value freedom, if you value the desire, the opportunity to have your own hairstyle, to say what you want, to read the books that you choose, you really would be in favor of Seoul and Tokyo and Washington rather than Pyongyang and Beijing. And that's the position, the ideological position the South Korean conservatives generally take. And it's weird to consider that a conservative position, but it is. It's done through human rights ideology. And so President Yoon's decision to enact martial law is just ridiculous, because to deny political opposition, to call the opposition anti-state actors, and to suggest that media needs to be controlled by martial law, it's becoming exactly the thing that they're meant to be against, which is North Korea, which is a lack of freedom. It's incredible, the decision that was made, which was pure political suicide. We don't know the full reasons why he did it. We do know that there has been political deadlock in the country almost since President Yoon has been president, because the National Assembly is controlled by the opposition, and anything that President Yoon tries to do, it's blocked, and this includes budgets, and this includes policies. Whether they're popular or not, he really can't get them through. And this is what led him to declare people of his own country anti-state actors. And it's a really disastrous way of looking at the country, I think. Politics in South Korea has become so incredibly political, so incredibly divided. Sometimes I wonder, is there a way out of this? Is there a way out of the red and the blue? Can we look beyond it? Certainly what President Yoon suggested was not the answer. I started this by saying that I don't believe Lee Jae-myung is the answer, and therefore I wonder, is there a chance, if there is an election, or is there a way that South Korea can look at this and say, maybe it's time that we stopped looking at this Cold War ideology between these two countries, between the Red Party and the Blue Party. I say that facetiously, because the South Korean parties here, they change their colors and their names very quickly. And they get down on their knees, apologize for the mistakes, then they put on different colored jackets and rename themselves, and we're all expected to forgive them 6 months down the line. But is this a chance for South Korea and the people of South Korea to look and say, you've both had your chance, and you've spent the last few decades fighting with each other, and while you've been fighting, this has been to the detriment of the lives of South Korea. This has been to the detriment of our livelihoods and our day-to-day experiences, our ability to buy a house, and our ability to afford a reasonable lunch and to look forward with hope. Now might be the time more than ever for South Korea to look at many of the other parties that exist, and not one of them is big enough. I don't believe at the moment. The Justice Party is normally the third party, but you have parties here representing labor unions and environmental movements and women's rights. They're all there, and if perhaps they can come together and perform or produce a genuine alternative to the binary Manichean Cold War politics that's dominated South Korea, this might be a great opportunity for the country. It might be a chance for people to see a way forward, to see the end of ideology. That's not to say that geopolitical influences aren't real. Of course they are. We know they are. But these two parties have had their attempts, and they've swapped power back and forth repeatedly. Maybe it's time to let someone else have a turn. And if a third party doesn't win, at least they can put themselves forward as a as a credible alternative, and maybe put down some seeds for a possible victory in the next 5, 10, 15, 25 years, because these things won't change easily. They won't change overnight. But it would be fascinating to see a third party emerge in South Korea. Maybe that might be the real treasure that could arise from the situation that we have seen. I must say something about the safety that we experienced here, because I received many messages and emails and phone calls saying, do I need to leave the country? Do you need to go to England? What's going on? Are you okay? All of these flooded in late Tuesday night, throughout the night until Wednesday morning and beyond. And I have to say that, yes, I was okay. For many people in South Korea, there was a psychological anxiety, but in terms of physical safety, while people may have seen across the front pages of newspapers all over the world, they may have seen photos and videos of armed men walking the streets or armored vehicles. This was not a period in which anybody, I don't think, really risked their lives being lost. And I say this with no disrespect to the people that did take to the street, to the democratic lawmaker that bravely held the gun of a soldier and asked, do you have no shame? There was some trepidation and there was psychological anxiety because we were entering a stage which nobody knew what was happening. My wife was scared for the future of our children, and she didn't know what to do. And of course, I didn't really have any answers either. But for the most part, people here were okay. The large majority, many South Koreans slept through it. And then it became something to talk about the next day. They slept through the enactment and then the withdrawal of martial law for the most part. It was done that way intentionally, I believe, from the president to do it when everybody was asleep. And so in terms of that, safety was there. But I need to address this idea of shame. My brother-in-law is a lieutenant colonel in the Korean military, and he spoke to me, and he just said he's so embarrassed. How could this happen? What might people think? And he asked me, what do people abroad think of this? How is this being perceived? And this was a sentiment, this is just one, but this is a sentiment that's been echoed by so many people to me in Korean. And we must remember that South Korea has worked so hard to build up its reputation into something that's positive. Through the 1960s and 70s and 80s, this was a country associated with the US drama MASH. It was associated with poverty. It was associated, many people didn't even know where Korea was, and if you did, Made in Korea was a cheap label that you saw on a low quality transistor radio or cheap textiles that came out of factories. Made in Korea was not desirable. And then when people did think of Korea, they thought of that repressive state in the north and all the talks of missiles and nuclear weapons and people in funny Maoist suits with strange haircuts. South Korea was either unknown or known for negative reasons. For those of us with an interest in South Korea, that seems strange to say, but it's true. In 2012, when Gangnam Style became the phenomenon that it was, for many people that was the first time that they'd really sort of become conscious of South Korea, at least that South Korea was capable of producing a high-end art, and that the visuals were off the chart, and that there was a quality to it. There was a sense of humor. This didn't sound like weird stifled propaganda music. That was 2012, and since then South Korea's cultural exports have just created such a sense of positivity around the world. My lecture halls are filled with students from Mexico, from Turkey, many from Indonesia, from South America, from Northern Europe, who come here because they've watched Korean dramas, they've listened to K-pop, they've stand idols, and they've done all of these things. They come here with a great knowledge of the language that simply floors me. And South Korea has turned itself into a cultural behemoth, so much so, in fact, that the letter K itself now denotes cool. And it's done that over decades. That wasn't a flash in the pan. It didn't happen overnight. that was a long-term success that it achieved. And it did so through, this wasn't all sort of government planned. There is that talk of that white paper of one Jurassic Park is the equivalent of 7 million Hyundais or whatever the figures were. But this was achieved by creative, hardworking, talented South Korean artists and entertainment companies producing products that people were really, really into. I mean, you can laugh at K-pop if you like, but the stuff they produce is high quality, and the people here are creative. And then in one move, in one crazy period of 6 hours, South Korea immediately then becomes associated once more with turmoil, dictatorship, dark days, troops on the streets. What's going on? Don't trust that country. There's something wrong there. Yes, they might have glitzy pop culture, but beneath the surface there's an Orientalist despotism that exists. And that's not something that I feel, but that's the image that has come to the forefront. That's the shame that's felt by South Korean people when they know that this is what their country will be known for again. And remember, it was only recently that Hanyang won the Nobel Prize for Literature, that the country was finally being seen. Had the pleasure of watching Past Lives with my students this week, which is a marvelous film documenting the sort of Korean American experience. It features the concept of inyon, the idea that you have to meet somebody sort of 8,000 times in your past lives before you become connected in this one. It's a marvelous film. And in that there is a line that the woman moves away because Korea as a country is too small and nobody from Korea will ever win the Nobel Prize for Literature. And it's kind of interesting, and it's a recent movie. It's only a year or so old, and that was the sentiment. Hanyang just completely proved that wrong, and now we're back here. So that sense of shame amongst the South Korean people, that might be something that you don't hear in others, and I wanted to bring that to your attention. The other thing that I thought is important to say is that now there's an international program that I have starting on the 26th of December. And that's just one. There will be these all over the country. And even before this impeachment and martial law fiasco, people were scared sometimes to come to Korea because this is a country technically still at war. There's North Korea, there's talk of soldiers, there's talk of military service. And some international students will tell me before they came here that their parents, their friends or their relatives would ask them, is it safe? Are you okay going there? What about North Korea? What about China? Etc., etc. And there's, to some degree, an element of trepidation for some people coming to South Korea, which is a wonderful paradox when you do come here and you sit in a coffee shop and leave your phone and laptop unattended and walk the streets by yourself at 2 a.m. without the fear of being attacked. But nevertheless, that did exist, and that's only going to have increased because of what we've just seen. And I feel very sorry for any international people who look at this and their positive image of South Korea has been damaged by this, and rightly it should. They should now look at this and make up their own minds about what's gone on. But this crazy 6 hours has really done a number on South Korea, not just politically, but psychologically, in terms of this soft power. And that's something that it's really hard to get across how much that's felt by South Korean people. It means a lot to them. Where do we go from here? As I said, this is really fluid, and probably there'll be updates. I might add something to this at some point, but President Yoon seems to have committed political suicide with this act. We don't know why he did it. We don't know what happens next, but it seems unlikely that he'll be able to finish out his term with public sentiment as it is. The gusts of popular feeling are very much real here. I saw in a piece a few years ago that B.R. Myers on his blog wrote, questioning when the candlelight protests will take down Yoon, and he might be right. He might be right. He sometimes is, whether we like to agree with him or not. This has been a crazy week. I'm not sure if this short exploration or review of what's gone on has given you any help or insight. I know I've not gone into all the details, but I've tried to add some color or flavor that you might not see elsewhere, and step back from all the news and television that I've had to do, and just tell a few stories and try to get across some of the feelings that I've had from people here in South Korea. The country is resilient. The people here are anti-fragile. Whatever happens next, I can only hope that South Korea might look for possible alternatives, because, as I said to start this, just because President Yoon is wrong, it doesn't mean necessarily that Lee Jae-myung has to be the answer. Thank you.